I'm Carol Reynolds, and it's a joy to be back with you tonight in the Meyerson Symphony Center. You're sitting exactly where I wish I would be, and while we're somewhat together, there's a bit of virtual reality separating me from you tonight. And considering the theme of this concert, a little bit of virtual reality is maybe a good thing. Fits right in with our themes, because we have quite a program in front of us. And we'll be beginning with a piece that honestly is as recognizable in its opening as any could ever be. It starts with just these three notes. The simplest thing you could ever imagine. Of course, doing something like that on a keyboard means nothing. Doing it where you're going to be sitting and having the full force of the Dallas winds is going to mean everything. But that famous opening, that very economical fanfare, if you will, that Richard Strauss used to set forth Also sprach Zarathustra, really was something at the time. And Strauss was a master at taking a very few notes and turning them into a motive, a theme, a link, a connecting that could bring together an entire major piece of literature or history for that matter. He knew how to do that. Richard Strauss was a brilliant man because he was spending in the first part of his very long career time writing what we call tone poems, symphonic poems. This had been figured out primarily, the credit goes to Berlioz in the first part of the 19th century, and then in the hands of Franz Liszt, who took the idea of creating a narrative in orchestral sound and a free form that would allow the composer to tell that story using orchestral sound without any formal considerations. That's something that Liszt did over and over for about a decade of composition. That legacy came to Strauss. And Strauss then really showed us how it was done, with works like Don Juan, Death and Transfiguration, Don Quixote, Till Eulenspiegel's Merry Pranks, A Hero's Life, Alpine Symphony, and Also sprach Zarathustra. Now this, of course, comes from a Nietzsche philosophical novel that was completed in 1885, and then this piece in 1896 with Strauss conducting. That would have been something to hear, right? And it is in 9 parts or episodes, and what we hear, the sunrise movement, is what will open the concert for us tonight. Well, you almost can't get better than that, but guess what? We're going to move forward in time to the kind of grandchild of what Richard Strauss was doing. Richard Strauss was polishing, if you will, the vocabulary for telling story in notes. And that idea would go to the next generation. And many in that generation had to leave their homelands, had to flee, had to come for safety to the United States. Some of the great names of what we call the great Hollywood film composers, Korngold and many, many others. And many of those people would end up in Hollywood, definitely, and would create what again I said, the golden age of film. The movies that we revere, both for their great directing, great stories, fabulous actors, but also the sound scores, without which they aren't the movies they are otherwise. And then that generation would give forth to the generation of John Williams, who has been highly celebrated this season for the extraordinary legacy of film music. And this tonight, we'll have a kind of a suite, if you will, or a segment of his film score to Close Encounters of the Third Kind. Now, Close Encounters came out in 1977. And I'm telling you, I remember it, going to see it in the theater. It's none of this thing where you can put the video on or stream it or the disc and say, let's watch that again and watch it again. No, you went to the theater and you saw it and you came out, your mouth was dropped. I mean, really through the whole thing. I don't know how it would be for those of you in the audience tonight who are young, who have never seen the film. I hope you'll be able to see it after tonight. And I would love to hear what you thought. For those of us who went through it as young people, we were just touched beyond belief and astonished at every aspect of it visually and the music. It came out on vinyl in 1977 as well. That's LPs, which are back. Who would have thought that would have happened? And it was actually in a gatefold sleeve. That's the very fancy record album that had another layer, if you will, that opened and you had extra place for great pictures. Very, very fancy. It came out on 8-track tape and audio cassette, and then not until 1990 on CD. So again, it was a big thing as a piece of music beyond the power of that film. And it had in it, once you spin the beauty of what you're going to hear as our second work on the program tonight, and it spins as that film itself does with these meanings and questions and unanswered questions. And then we get, and I don't want to give the plot away, we get this little motive, again, just a few notes, very economical, that will be really the vocabulary of the space creatures who are in that movie. That's enough to say. Now that melody again, simple thing that John Williams was able to do. Those pitches and all that they imply in that plot became the vocabulary for that film. And that's enough to say about that too. Again, it within the movie it's fabulous. But as a piece of music, it's also fabulous. And that's when you know you have a great film composer. From that, we'll step back to something quite different, and yet a blockbuster of its own when it happened, when it came about, when this opera, which is called Schwanda the Bagpiper by Yaramir Weinberger, came out in 1926, premiere in 1927, and it was such a huge success. It had 100 performances in the next little while. Yaramir Weinberger was one of those composers who ended up fleeing. He was from Prague originally, born under the Habsburgs Empire. He was Jewish. He trained in Prague. He was 14. He was in the conservatory, then went to Leipzig, and he studied with Max Reger, great organist, great organ composer, great Bach scholar, who was able to write the kind of complicated counterpoint that Bach made look so easy. And I have to say, Reger doesn't make it look quite as easy as Bach did, but he's in the same class, okay? And that teaching and that training for Weinberger really does show up in all of his music. But this is the piece we remember him for. He ended up fleeing Europe and coming in 1939 to the United States. He ended up actually in Florida. He didn't go to Hollywood the way so many names, big names did. And he was a teacher, professor. He could never replicate the popularity of this wonderful piece. Now, a lot of his pieces that have just been sitting by the side are getting a lot of renewed attention. And that is a great thing that is happening. And I think you'd be very pleased. But it has this melody. I mean, it has a lot of melodies. And when the second part comes, you'll see how can such the combination of this very strict counterpoint and brainy guy with this joyful melody that he uses for the fugue. After all, most people playing a polka don't stick a fugue at the second part of it. But boy, he did. And it's got this beautiful folk song. I just have to stop with it for a second because it will give us that little bit of space we need before we hit the big piece on this program. And it goes like this, though. Performed a lot, you'll recognize it, and it's quite lovely. It sort of makes you think if you're in a festival, folk festival somewhere, and grand and glorious, and as I say, a bit of space, a bit of joy before we go off into outer space again. And we will do that by going to Gustav Holst's The Planets. The Planets is a major piece of Western heritage of our repertoire in Western music. And Gustav Holst, who was prolific as a composer, had enormous success with it, almost to the point where he wished it hadn't been quite so successful. You know, that happens sometimes. A composer has a blockbuster, and then you kind of think, but wait a minute, what about all these other 45 pieces that I've just written in the last several years that are glorious? But at any rate, Holst was growing up in England, but was filled with brilliant minds. Literary minds, philosophical minds, all kinds of developments in political arena. It's just an incredible time in the late 19th century and in the early teens, in those years leading up to the First World War. He had friends like Ralph Vaughan Williams, which, you couldn't get a better friend than that. And they had lots of interests shared in folk music and in all kinds of things that they talked about. And the idea, actually, for this piece, The Planets, developed in a very interesting kind of way. It developed on a train. A lot of music and ideas start on trains, or if you want to go back in time, in carriages, if you will, on wagons and horses. But when you went on a trip, you have time to think. And in this case, it was 1913, and Holst was there with three friends. One of them was Arnold Bach, a well-known composer of the time, very fine composer. And his younger brother, Clifford, had become interested in astrology. Because you see, we're thinking astronomy tonight, but Holst was thinking astrology, and differently than we tend to think of it in the newspaper, maybe, somebody's horoscope. Although he was interested in all of that. Holst was interested in all kinds of things. He was interested in Sanskrit and Asian culture and languages, and ancient languages and legends. I mean, he was really a globalist in terms of his cultural interests. So he's on this train with his friends, and Clifford begins talking to him about a writer who was really making news. His name was Alan Leo. His real name was William Frederick Allen, but he became Alan Leo. And he was interested in not just astrology as we might think of it, but is turning it into what we might say a science almost, that would be dealing with spiritual and psychological forms of the human behavior. He was wanting it to help delineate character rather than just predict things. And that was very trendy at the time, and that caught Holst's interest. And so, for example, when Holst was looking through and reading Leo's writings, he found Leo describing planets. For example, Mars is what Leo wrote. He called it, always aggressive, combative, and assertive. Boy, it's the piece he wrote that. Jupiter, Leo described as a combination of feeling and thought. It includes humanity, benevolence, compassion, humor, candor, good humor, honor, and the higher moral and social qualities, you see. And again, Saturn, the lord and ruler that makes progress through life slow and steady. Those under its influence will be more plodding and persevering than brilliant and active. And again, the character of these planets really is what interested, through the lens of writings like Leo's, is what interested Holst. Now, he also was working, and you'll notice there's 7 movements. Well, wait a minute. Were there 8 planets at the time? We have Earth. Where's Earth in here? It's not there. Pluto had not yet been discovered. Poor Pluto. It's in, it's out, it's half in. None of that had happened yet. That was a bit in the future. But Earth, why is Earth not there? Because Holst was envisioning it in the scheme of astrology, which puts all of the cosmos floating around the Earth. I don't quite understand how that happens, but that's how it does. And so Earth wasn't a factor. It's not there, you see. It's kind of a fun thing to think about. So you get the other 7. And boy, do you ever get them in an amazing, amazing way. In some ways, this piece is kind of a delightful, lyrical, exciting, like a film score. And it's been described that way by many, many people. Leonard Bernstein was very fond of this work. In fact, it was one of the last works that he featured in his incredible series called A Young People's Concert that ran starting in the late 50s. And you might have seen it. It's very interesting, the program he does on this. And you can find it on VHS, and you can find it on DVD, and probably you can even download it and stream it. And he described his piece as, music for sheer enjoyment, first-class entertainment. Well, of course it is, and it uses all kinds of orchestral color at the time in the original score, bass oboe, tenor tuba, alto flute, organ. I mean, all these things coming together. They've been used together, of course, in the past, big orchestral works, but there they all are, 6 horns and 2 sets of timpani. This is not absolutely new, but it was a very strong statement for Holst, a good proper Englishman, to be making. But I think this piece is far more modern than that. If you really look at movement by movement, measure by measure, score by score, the way things are developed and the techniques and the layering, I think it has a lot, and it did have a lot to say to 20th century composers, all the way down to someone that's very beloved in this audience, Eric Whitacre. Again, there's lots of influences, but Holst is taking things, that really the minimalist people like Philip Glass would later take. Just this sound possibilities, the static and the repeating, the ostinato, the patterns. It's just marvelous, and yet always lyrical and beautiful, or exciting and forceful. So let's just take a couple of moments, because you're going to hear the piece, the real piece, right there where I wish I were right next to you right now. And you're going to have it all happen in front of you. But just pointing out a few things. The fact that, again, that economy of means, just a few notes, just a few melodies to set up, just a few rhythms. Mars is just grand when it starts. I mean, what could be more glorious than the beginning of Mars? And you have this, and it's in 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Although faster. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Whatever the speed's going to end up being, And you have that triplet. planet sets that up, and it grows and it grows. It's first quiet and it creeps. And then you have this simple economic, if you will, just again, up a fifth and then down a half step. It's already forceful and bellicose and violent and crazy and wild, and the whole piece is that it has moments of breaking away from that back and forth. Boom! Mars. Incredible. And then you take something like Jupiter, which is the most popular movement in terms of how often people hear it. It comes up the most. If you did, what are the most probably requested movements of the planets, because they're all amazing. They really are. It's impossible. I can't find a favorite. I just can't. I try. I can't. But Jupiter has so many familiar melodies. Even if you don't know anything about Holst, you'll hear it and you'll go, oh, I've heard that. Oh, I know that one, because they show up a lot. And one of the melodies that I think is just so incredibly beautiful for it is it's one of those English style folk songs, and it goes like this. That's we get in the English compositional school at this point, that lyrical, broad, beautiful, deep, rich folk, but yet more elevated than folk song, if you will. So that's glorious. And there are other moments in that, other melodies in Jupiter that will be real clicks with everything we love about music. And boy, that is something, that movement. Another movement that's just super, I think that always interests me, is again that economy of melody, economy of notes, economy of themes. And that would be Uranus, which is called the magician in Holst's idea of the character of it. And this is another one of those moments where you have economy of means. That huge opening, of course, it's going to sound fabulous from the stage. Bom, bom. And he will use that, because Holst was a fabulous technician with composition. He will use that as a generator of this whole kind of magical movement. Well, so much awaits you in this concert, and there's so much glory. But one of the other glories that Holst could not have imagined is the fact that you will have the visual elements from the Hubble telescope. It went up, I think, 1990. For young people, it's kind of ordinary to see these images, but all of us who are a little bit older, we remember when those images began to come back to Earth, and literally, again, our jaws dropped. Nobody could have imagined anything like what the Hubble was able to film for years, the galaxy, and they're stunning images. So what I think is interesting, to having it is one thing, but maybe something else tonight, if it catches your fancy. Think of all the people, go back to the ancient Greeks, trying to describe the planets through their incredible mythological stories, from which we get the names of some of them, like Saturn and Mars, right? Think about, if you will, not just the ancients, but all the people in the Renaissance who were creating telescopes of incredible sophistication and other ways of mapping the world and trying to understand our planet and the universe. Think about all the developments in the 18th century during the Enlightenment, and the ability for those telescopes to get better and better till they could map the moon right around 1800 and really begin to do moon atlases shortly into the 19th century. And think about everything that's happened since then, and the space shots, and you think again about the films the science fiction trying to explain and show us this universe. And then we have these amazing pictures. Imagine all those people put together next to you in the row with you tonight, watching and experiencing the performance that you will be experiencing. And I think there would be a lot of thrill and amazement if that could just happen. So enjoy this concert, and I will look forward to seeing you without virtual reality very soon. It's been a pleasure to be with you. I'm Carol Reynolds, and let's have some music.